Okay, Rob, you about ready to rock and roll then?
I'm all yours.
Brilliant, thanks, Rob. Well, listen, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today with the Campaign for Common Sense, and we're here to try and encourage people to have enlightening and useful conversations about difficult topics, where often there's more heat than light generated. And it feels really, really appropriate that we're lucky enough to have Rob Halfon MP joining us today. Because Rob has been one of the more interesting and engaging MPs in Parliament since he joined in 2010. And he's one of those people that has never shied away from getting involved in discussions and difficult issues, but he's always gone about it in a way that's been really respectful, and that he's been really, really good at listening to all sides of the argument. Now, I'll say a little bit more about Rob in a minute, but before we get going, just a few things about how today's going to run. This is our first ever Zoom event. Probably lots of you watching this at home today are far more experienced with these kind of things than we are. So we're kind of IT novices. Please bear with us. We're going to try and keep things really, really simple. You should be able to see the CCS logo on your screen. Behind that screen is my colleague, James Nell. James is actually the common sense bit of the Campaign for Common Sense. He's a smart, very sensible guy. And what we're going to do today to try and keep things flowing is, if you want to ask Rob a question when we get to the Q&A session this morning, please can you, using the chat function, send a message to James, okay, to James Nell, or send it to all panelists. James is going to be keeping an eye on that, and he will be making a note of the questions that are asked, and then he's going to try and make sure we cover a range of topics, and he will forward those questions on to me so I can put them to Rob directly. So to try and keep it straightforward today, we're not going to be bringing the audience in to ask the questions themselves, because I'd probably muck it up, to be honest. So please, if you've got a question, send them to James now, and then he'll forward them on to me. And at the end of today, if you've got any feedback about how we've done it, ways we could improve this for future events, because we do intend to do more of these in the future, do please let us know through Twitter, Facebook, or through emailing us directly. Okay, so that's it really. So we're the Campaign for Common Sense. We believe that no one side or group or person has got a monopoly on what's right and wrong, and we think that when it comes to difficult conversations, we've all got far more in common than it's sometimes seems, and we think that common sense and fair play are the best way as a society to work our way through these difficult topics, and that we can do it without throwing insults and being horrible to one another. I think Rob Halfon is a brilliant example of how we can engage in these kind of things. So Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming along. We're not going to try and catch you out today. We're really keen to hear your views on different things. But before we get into that, if you were describing yourself to people, a bit about your background and why it is you got into politics, what would you say? What was it that kind of lured you into the world of Westminster?
Well, I was a very strange child, because what happened in my school, when I was about 10 years old, an MP came to visit the school. And he said that the Houses of Parliament had 1,000 rooms. And I genuinely didn't believe this. I demanded to go to see these 1,000 rooms. And I get to asking and asking to go, and I was taken. I was either a school tour, I think it was, or somebody told me, I can't quite remember, but I decided I'd be an MP on that day. I went to members' lobby, central lobby. I just thought it was the most incredible building, and it took me 30 years, and then I started getting into politics, and I started to follow what the Prime Minister of the day, was Mrs T, was saying, and no doubt to the horror of some of your listeners, I found that I agreed with a lot of what she was saying at the time. And my family was not political, but they had the kind of, my father was an immigrant. He came here with nothing. He did well. He sold fruit and veg wholesale to hotels all over London, had a warehouse in Spitalfields. It's all yuppie flats now, where it was.
Yeah.
And PR agencies and goodness knows what. It's all become so-called trendy and so on. But there was the Thatcherite embodiment of the Thatcherite common, dare I say it, common sense, work hard, education. If you work hard, do the right thing, save, have that ladder opportunity, aspiration, you will do well in life. And the sort of Thatcher, what she was saying at the time, kind of in the early years specifically, of Mrs. Thatcher kind of embodied what my family was all about.
Gotcha. And so clearly, from what you're saying, it sounds like that has informed your politics, hasn't it? Your upbringing, your family background informed your politics. So what would you describe your priorities have been so far since you came into politics? Obviously, education's a big thing. What other kind of things have been your priorities, and why?
So my priorities since I've been in the as an MP have been to what I call address. I want our party to be a social justice party, and I don't mean that in a mushy way. To me, it's ensuring both there's a safety net, but also a ladder of opportunity for people. I don't like the word social mobility because it sounds like a Vodafone advert. And when I ask my constituents, no one really knows what it means, but they do know what the word justice means. And I wanted to try and change my party so that we focused on those who struggle, find conservative solutions to help these people, but focus on social capital as much as economic capital.
And how far do you think the Conservative Party's moved in that direction? You said you wanted to help change it. How successful do you think you and others have been?
I think there's a long way to go, but I think we've also come a long way. So that compared to when I was a parliamentary candidate in the 90s, and it was very much Tory boy, Harry Enfield. The reason why those Harry Enfield things worked was because everybody believed them to be true. You know, these satires only work if people think there's a ring of truth to it. But if I look at the Conservative Party now and see all those MPs from seats across the north of England, where, you know, I sit next to, I always go right at the back in the House of Commons. I kind of mark my place like a lion because you have to put a prayer card in to get there. It's a bit like the Germans on the beaches with the towels on the deck chairs and so on, but you have to put a prayer card in if you want your seat early in the morning. And I sit next to a very nice MP called Ian Levy, Blythe Valley. He's a mental health nurse assistant, I think. And we've got teachers. I mean, it's really changed compared to the Conservative Party that I grew up with, and that's a good thing. And I think that we are talking about public services in a way that we have not done in the past. And despite what our opponents say, there is a significant amount of money that is now being spent on the National Health Service and other public services. Of course, there's always a need for more. But I just think many Conservatives talk about these things. The free school meal issue over the summer, for example, I think is a signal of how the Conservative Party has changed, because although it was a U-turn by the government, it came not just from Marcus Rashford, who did a brilliant campaign, but also from a lot of pressure from MPs across the party, and that wouldn't have happened in the past.
Yeah, so you're saying that the pressure that was coming from Conservative MPs and others is a sign of the Conservative Party and the kind of people that are its MPs you think has changed now to previously?
Well, I think because I think very much so. I think that the Conservatives, I mean, there's a long way to go still. We make a lot of mistakes, and there's always something that happens that reinforces the stereotype without going into the individual incident, because I don't want to embarrass the MP, but there will be something that happens in the media that reinforces a stereotype of a rich Tory MP. And I think that is incredibly damaging, because it isn't about aspiration. It's because people struggle and they just see the ruling, living it up.
And you've talked about like the different kind of people that are MPs now. Like, what for you is, you've been an MP now for 10 years. What's the best bit of the job, the bit that you love the most, and what's the toughest bit of the job?
I love my constituency. I love going to do my community visits. You've got a background in education. I do a school visit almost every Friday. Yeah. In fact, this Friday I'm going to a summer school, which has been done, which is very impressive. In fact, I just did a pre-visit last week, and you've got kids going in to learn physics, giving up their summer holidays to do a few hours a day physics with the STEM Learning Academy. I mean, I wouldn't have done that. I would have wanted to have fun, or whatever, but it's pretty amazing. So I'm going to that on Friday, but I normally go to school. That's my favorite thing, to go to school or college. I've visited my college 80 times. Wow. Of course, when you're in Parliament, when there is a big occasion, you feel that you're living history as it happens, and you then sit on TV and you feel privileged to be part of that. Because you're making big decisions that affect the lives of thousands of people. It has changed a lot, and even since I've been there. And I work for MPs, but it's changed a lot in terms of the. I mean, I worked for MPs in the days of paper. I'm not that old, and the MPs would get a few letters a week, and nowadays you get 300 or 400 emails, 500 emails a day, and social media, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and. People now feel that they can be as abusive as they want to be, which they wouldn't necessarily have been. I get a lot of lovely people as well, but there is a lot of horrible people about. And the social media, I think, makes it easier because people can hide behind emails.
Yes.
Or Twitter or whatever it might be. And then when you see them in face to face, they're often much nicer than you imagine them to be.
Isn't it funny? Because like we, you know, you're interested in education, I've got an education background. We bring kids up, don't we, to be polite and kind to one another, and then something happens when people get behind a keyboard, or adults that should know better, and suddenly they're really quite abusive and horrid. So talking about education, that's been like one of your big focuses. Obviously, you were really keen to be the chair of the Education Select Committee, which obviously you've done now for a while. Why for you was education such a big focus?
Well, my passion has been education and skills, and it was the first ever speech I made in the House of Commons was about apprenticeships and trying to encourage teachers to get more students to do apprenticeships at school. And the reason for this was when I was a parliamentary candidate, because I fought, I got in at the third attempt in my constituencies. I haven't moved around as so-called safer seats. I stayed in Harlow, which I love. And but I was a candidate in 2008, having fought and lost 2 elections before that. And I went into a grim building in my constituency where there was a charity called Catch 22 that was basically helping left behind students. All of them wanted to do an apprenticeship. Now I knew about apprenticeships, obviously, but I didn't know them in the detail that I do now. And they all said how difficult it was, that they'd had to travel. And I just suddenly realized, walking out of that building, that apprenticeships were the ladder of opportunity for young people. And it's why I decided to major on it. And in terms of education in general, I see education solving so many of the problems that children, pupils, students face, that it gets them back up that ladder. You can address social injustice, because sometimes the problems with disadvantaged families, it might take a generation to change. It might be significant. There's all kinds of issues to do with welfare, housing, really complex problems. But the one place of stability is the school.
Yeah.
Not only does the school provide learning nowadays, but mental health, well-being, a meal, a hot meal often, and friendship, counselling. The teachers and the support staff have taken on an enormous role. So schools are, if someone can go to a good school and have all those things, if they come from a disadvantaged background, you can transform their lives.
So,
I see education, both in terms of academic learning and in terms of social capital, possibly the most important tool that society has to change people's lives, apart from what goes on at home. But as I say, that is much more complex and much more longer term.
So, so you've been an MP for 10 years. There's been a Conservative government for 10 years. So they've had a lot of time to influence the education system in the country. What do you think are the strengths of our education system? And what do you think are the weaknesses or the bits that haven't been got right yet?
Well, I think the strengths are that we've done a lot to improve standards. I also think that the work done on reading for younger people, and I believe in phonetics, and I think that has been a good thing, absolutely. Yeah. I believe in the academy system because I think that should be autonomous. I do think schools should be as autonomous as possible. I worry about these ginormous kind of mega corporate multi-academy trusts that become so big, and they're dotted in huge, completely different parts of the country. I always have a philosophy of small is beautiful. But on the whole, I think academy is a good thing. I support the free schools. I think they're very good. They have very good results. But again, we need more of them in disadvantaged areas.
Yeah.
I like that we're now talking about apprenticeships and skills. We've had millions of apprenticeships since 2010. I think that's a good thing. So I think there have been some really good things that have happened. Where I worry is in terms, and go back to the social justice thing, I think there are too many people not climbing that ladder of opportunity. So I think special needs, the way we is a mess in terms of parents wading through time and time again this treacle of awful bureaucracy to try and get the right care for their child, unless of course they're in with their local MP or they can lobby their own MP.
Yeah.
It's a postcode lottery provision. There aren't enough specialists, and the government did a very good act in 2014, but it hasn't been implemented properly.
Right.
And I think there needs to be major change there. I think there are big issues with attainment. We know that disadvantaged kids get in the mid-40s GCSE pass compared to in the mid-70s for their better off peers. We know that, and that stalled over the last 3 years, the attainment gap. And I think that is a problem. It's a big problem.
Why do you think that is?
I don't think that enough focus is given on looking after the disadvantaged or left behind pupils, and I very much support these. I'd like to see the pupil premium perhaps more ring fenced. Whether it becomes a catch-up fund, permanent catch-up fund, or whatever it is, but that clearly needs reform, because I'm not yet convinced. I don't know what studies have been done to see whether or not the pupil premium is a success. I absolutely support the pupil premium, just to be clear, but is it a success? Do we really know? Or is it used? It's used to help lower income pupils, absolutely, but is it also used to close deficits or deal with funding problems that schools may have? Because it can be spent on anything. So I think that and I'd like to have, I think all the evidence I've seen that these tutoring agencies and tutor charity groups that can work with teachers and help them seem to be doing a very good job. And it doesn't cost that much either.
Right.
It seems to be relatively low cost. So if this catch-up 1 billion programme works that the government have announced, I think they should look at, whether is this something that all schools could benefit from, to help the teachers with looking after those pupils dealing with attainment and so on. But it isn't just attainment. There are we know that across schools there are significant rises in mental health. Every time I go to schools, I ask the kids, they say it's down to social media most of the time. There may be more complex reasons than that, but whatever, we do know that it's happening. And one thing I've learned as an MP is just how big mental health issues are for so many people in our country, whatever background they may come from. And I think we need much more investment in trained mental health specialists in all schools. Charities like Place to Be that I think do a very good job, needs to be more widespread. But we need to acknowledge that this is an issue and actually invest in something that is a problem.
So you've listed about all sorts of things which schools do nowadays to look after their pupils, and areas where you think that they could maybe do with more funding or more priority or whatever. Like what aspects do you think schools should be covering more in the curriculum? Is there stuff in the curriculum that they think they could be doing more about, or areas that you think they don't do enough of at the moment?
Well, I definitely think, and me and you, I think, have argued about this in the past, is that I believe in that there needs to be much more vocational. If we're talking about academic curriculum, are we? Or talking about general? So,
generally.
Generally, I think the world is changing in a big way, and I believe that knowledge and skills go hand in hand. You absolutely have to have knowledge. So I'm not against any of that, and I love the Michaela Free School, and I've just got her book, which I've read half of. Catherine Birbalsing's book, which is brilliant, really worth a read. But I also think the world is changing. We need much more vocational learning. I find it depressing that design and technology has declined. I'm not quite clear why geography is part of the baccalaureate, but design and technology isn't. I think we need to ask big questions where, do you need GCSEs at 16? I want testing, so I don't want people to think I want, trying to weaken down standards. Maybe you have an assessment, even if it's an exam-based system at 16, but actually I think the big exam should be at 18. And I think it's wrong that because kids are now at school to 18 unless they do an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
I think it's wrong that we have such a narrow A-level focus at such a
And
young age. I would have
oh,
a much
actually,
wider baccalaureate, which included vocational and academic education, and you shouldn't be able to just get away with doing all art subjects, as I did, by the way. So I sound,
yeah.
but I shouldn't have been allowed to do that. I did
Yeah.
history and politics.
You think pupils should be encouraged to be sort of spread out and do a broader range for
It
longer?
should be a baccalaureate. I think we
Yeah.
should get rid of A levels and have a baccalaureate. Yeah, and then you
So,
have, and that would be the grade, the exam system that businesses recognise. And at 16, you'd have some kind of tests or exams, but they would be really to look at students' progress, not for employers.
gotcha. So now you've mentioned exams, so it would be remiss of me not to bring up the recent A-level and GCSE results debacle. Like, from where you are, as you know, chair of the Education Select Committee, and as an MP who's been interested in education for ages, like, how do you think the government got it so wrong in terms of how things panned out, and what do you think they can do to? In fact, can I read you out a question that we had through that
Sure.
links into this, which is from Lynn Faulkner, and her question was: after the A-level and GCSE results fiasco this year, what do you think the Select Committee, and what will you do as chair of the Select Committee to try and make sure next year pupils aren't disadvantaged? Yeah. So how do we get it so wrong, and what can we do to learn from it?
Well, first of all, we had the Ofqual to our Select Committee in June, and then we published a report in early July, and we said three things. One, in the report, we talked about both over prediction and under prediction, of disadvantaged groups. And secondly, we talked about that the appeal system that they had devised, I thought was ridiculous, because you could only appeal based on bias and discrimination. And I thought, how on earth is anyone going to prove that? It seemed to me absurd. I kept arguing for a wider appeal system. That's what our report said. We also said to them, publish this so-called algorithm so that people can scrutinize it. Now, I wouldn't know how to scrutinize an algorithm, but clever people, much cleverer people than me, would understand it, whether it's the Royal Statistical Society or, and then it could have been argued about, scrutinized, and it could have been changed. And the other thing I'll make it, I'm a conservative, and I also think it went against everything conservatism is supposed to be about, this so-called algorithm, because conservatism, you asked me about my family earlier, is about individual aspiration and achievement. And this algorithm was based on the collective memory rather than individual aspiration and achievement. So it doesn't matter what a student was predicted, even if it had been for a long time, for 18 months, getting A's and all their, you know, not just the mocks, but, you know, schoolwork. If the collective memory of the cohort or the school was a negative one, then it would have affected their grades. Now that, to me, is the opposite of what a conservative philosophy is supposed to be about, which is you reward individual attainment and merit. I don't know why you couldn't have had a system whereby either, well, perhaps now we possibly should have delayed the exams if possible, or you would have had a system whereby you, Mark, would have assessed the grades, the teacher grade assessment, and then you'd had an independent assessor checking it through. Now, whether resource-wise that would have been possible, I don't know. But given that Ofqual had the resources to check every single individual student grade, but if you had a human person checking it to make sure that grade was fair, given that their individual's history, not the school's history, the individual's history, I think that would have solved some of the problems. I also think if they'd had a wider appeal system that you could have appealed really quickly, signed off by your head teacher, and you'd had a fast turnaround. If they'd put all that in place weeks ago, you might not have had some of the issues that, or the anger that people felt. In terms of what can be done about it, well, first of all, I think we've had these last 6 months, in my view, has been a national disaster for education, for our young people. I mean, in some ways, a scandal, what has gone on. So there have been incredible efforts by teachers, support staff and schools, where they've done the online learning, they've done all paper homework. But we know for one reason or another that millions of children have not been learning, or millions of children have not had any contact with teachers. And I don't understand why this should have, first of all, the Department of Education should have set out from the beginning very strong guidance about what they expected the kids to learn.
Yeah.
every day. Now they'll say, well, schools are autonomous. Yes, they are, but we talked about phonetics earlier. They implemented that across the board. The second thing is that Ofsted should have sort of had a semi-hibernation badger type role during the coronavirus, because badgers, I think, semi-hibernate. They don't go to ground completely. Yeah. And they were doing children in care and working with local authorities, but why on earth? I didn't want them to inspect schools, absolutely, but why on earth weren't they acting as critical friends to schools, helping them with safeguarding issues? I think they should have had much more of a leadership role.
Yeah.
And the third thing, of course, you did have obstruction from some, not all of them, but some of the unions, even when the government wanted a modest opening of schools, imposing conditions that very few workplaces had imposed.
Yeah.
So I think one thing has gone wrong with another. And if we do have local lockdowns or regional lockdowns, that has to change. It has to be absolutely clear. Oh, sorry, the other thing is these national procurement schemes never work. So government probably got it on the cheap for the taxpayer. And then they say, well, we'll deliver them in 3 weeks. It took 2 or 3 months to get these computers.
Do you mean stuff like the laptops and stuff?
Laptops. It took ages to get out. Why on earth you just don't give? I would have given vouchers to the teachers to go to Curry's.
Yeah.
And buy if there's 100 kids, buy 100 Chromebooks from Curry's.
And so, looking ahead to next year, then, like, do you think the system is better prepared for any future disruption, or
well, I think we need to do an analysis of how left behind children are. Mm-hmm. That should have also been done at the very beginning by the Department of Education. They should have done an impact assessment on what is going to happen to the children. That wasn't done during lockdown, and I think we need to find out what exactly has happened to the children, how much catch up do they need to children's pupils and students. And then you decide what the policy should be afterwards. So, I mean, is it going to be unfair to have exams in a traditional way next year because of the loss of learning? But we don't know that until we just can assess. And then that needs to be done pretty quickly, really, by both the Department of Education working with schools. And then you decide whether or not you have exams next year. But if you don't have exams next year, then you need to go, I think it needs to be done in the system that I described, where you have a teacher assessed grade and an independent assessor. I can't see any algorithm working.
Yeah. So either way, it feels like there's going to have to be a concerted effort by teachers and schools with the DfE to find out what the gap is with kids now, or to plan ahead for any exams, if they're going to be sat, how they're different, or if exams aren't sat, the teacher assessment. So it's going to be a lot of work for a lot of people, isn't it? We can't avoid it.
And I'd like the Prime Minister to set out a national long-term plan for education. How are we going to address look after the left behind pupils, particularly who've suffered in the coronavirus? What are we going to do to address social injustice, extend that ladder of opportunity? How are we going to close our skills deficit? What are we going to do on standards? How are we going to support the profession in terms of the teacher recruitment problems that we have? You know, I think it's a third of teachers who qualify leave within 5 years.
I've got a question here actually from Professor Sam Twistleton. She sort of said, how do you think, are you worried about teacher retention, like off the back of the corona stuff and all the pressure people have been put through?
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast, the video cast, Professor. I am very worried about it, and it isn't just a problem of coronavirus, it's been a problem for a while. And the bigger problem is that it particularly hurts areas of disadvantage where you have teacher recruitment. So I think a couple of things need to be done. First of all, clearly financial incentives where you have teacher deficits in areas, and support staff. But the other thing, I think perhaps we need to go back to local training teacher colleges in areas where you don't have teachers. So if in a certain part of the country there just aren't enough, I think if you had a teacher training college locally that then supplied teachers to those local schools, I think that might help as well. But of course, there has to be financial incentive and good working conditions and so on. But this is something we've got to grapple with because we just need teachers and support staff in our schools.
Can I move on now from schools specifically? I mean, education's been in the news a lot over the summer. Schools has obviously been a big part of it. Let's talk about universities for a little bit. Now, something that we're really interested in at Campaign for Common Sense and is increasingly being picked up by the media more widely, is that around free speech or freedom of expressions on universities. Lots of academics and students are feeling they can't talk about certain issues if they don't conform to what some people call, like, you know, the woke acceptable views, whether it's about race, gender identity and stuff like that. What are your feelings about sort of, you know, political correctness as it's gone through the academy?
Yeah, I really worry about it. If someone is going to break the law and be racist or whatever, absolutely not. The laws are there and they're very clear. But what seems to be happening is, so for example, if you're a speaker who might be pro-Israel, you might be crowded out of, or it might be made very difficult. Or what happened with one university is that the students were told to pay for bodyguards and the security by the university authorities. Now, how on earth is a student society that has peanut budget supposed to pay for thousands of pounds of security? And really, they were doing that because they were trying to stop the visit going ahead. And I think that is entirely wrong. And I think the government have got to make it very clear that this is not acceptable. As I say, if it's a racist who's breaking the law, no way. But sometimes, you know, I do go back. Sometimes when they're horrible people, sometimes it's better to hear them because you have the argument and you can expose them. I think, do you remember when the BNP guy turned up on BBC Question Time a long time ago?
Yeah.
The wonderful thing about that was that his opinion poll ratings crashed from that time, and he became a laughing stock in essence. And that was because there was the argument and people could see how ridiculous this individual was. And they wouldn't have necessarily seen that had he been not exposed to prime time television. So
and it's really tricky though, isn't it? Because I would tend to agree with you, but lots of universities don't hold that view. They're very scared or very cautious about their students, backlash from their students if they allow certain speaks on there. Do you think the government should do more to reinforce freedom? I
think the government needs to make it very clear to universities in terms of the guidance that providing no one breaks the law, that you have to have free speech on campus, because you can't allow one group of people to decide that another group of people is objectionable just because they don't like the views. As I say, if people are breaking the law, fine. I don't want them on campus. And if you know, this cannot continue, and I worry about it. I gave the argument of the Jewish society, and that is the tip of the iceberg. These things are happening all the time across campuses. It's not acceptable.
And then another way that, if you like, education has been dragged into, rightly so, into the debate over the summer with the Black Lives Movement taking off. Now, you know, the stuff that happened in America on George Floyd was pretty horrific, but then of course we saw the protests springing up around the world, and now there's a lot more calls by activists to decolonize the curriculum, whether it's in schools or at universities, or to remove certain courses from universities, or to remove certain bits of history that schools teach. Do you think the curriculums in schools, universities need to be decolonized, or, you know, how do you think we should reflect different bits of history?
I think you have to approach this. First of all, you have to recognize there's a problem, and there is a problem with racism in the United States and across the world. There's no doubt in my mind about that. I mean, in America, I just go back, one of my favorite Bob Dylan songs is a very sad song called The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, which is about a rich plantation owner who just beats a chambermaid who dies with his stick just for the fun of it. It's based on a true story. In America, have had these problems for decades, even now. And so there is justified anger, why on earth these things are happening, and why sometimes these things happen in our country, although I don't think, thank God, we're at the level of what goes on in the United States. Then the problem is that a worthy cause is often hijacked by, in my view, by political activists who have their own agenda and want to defund the police or whatever, and use an organization that has no, you know, the message is noble. I mean, who wouldn't believe that Black Lives Matter for their own political purposes? And I find that entirely wrong. I don't accept the argument that you can't learn about Black history in the curriculum. That is, it can be taught from primary school onwards. It's up to the teachers to provide. But I want us to teach not just all the awful things that have gone on, but the great people of all races and nations, the contribution they've made to Britain you know, in terms of British history, and we should look at black role models as well as some of the history. And then, you know, you can't I mean, there are so many awful things that have gone on. I my own things, I don't understand why people don't learn more about. I ask students, so I'm from a Jewish background, so believe me, I want kids to learn about the Holocaust. I have it steeped in, you learn about it all the time. Every Jewish person knows about the Holocaust, and I welcome the work of the Holocaust Educational Trust. But in Soviet Union in the 30s, there was also the Holodomor, where nearly 4 million Ukrainians were starved to death. They ended up eating each other. You know, you had 5 million people die in the early 30s just from starvation alone in the Soviet Union. Many others murdered, and so on. And yet, if you ask students, they know about Nazi Germany, which is a good thing. But very, you know, I've never met a student who very rarely, who knows about the Ukrainian famine by the Stalin. I read a book recently about it all, and it is horrific what went on. And people need to, if we're talking about history, we need to learn about all forms of oppression and in every way. So I think.
Why do you think pupils aren't taught about the evil things that went on in Soviet Russia and Eastern Europe and other places like that? And what can we do to teach? And how do we then encourage schools to teach it more? If you think it needs to be done more,
why it doesn't happen? I think I don't know the answer to it. Actually, I think there isn't enough. There should be a lot more. I think again, this should come from government and people in political authority and leadership, and say that we need to study these things more as well. I think Tim Montgomery, a journalist who used to be commentator to the Times and has done websites, I think he's talked about the idea of setting up a museum of communism. Why don't we have a museum of communism? We have wonderfully, and I've been there, and it's an incredible place. We have a museum of the Holocaust. Now, I'm not equating what happened in Nazi Germany with what happened under communism, but the fact is millions of people were murdered by Stalin and other leaders, Lenin before him and leaders after him, and I think that should be learned by pupils in our country.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Listen, we've got a few. Is it okay if we can go to some questions from the audience now? So let's go for. Oh, you'll like this one. You'll like this one. This is from Lauren Costello, and it's about apprenticeships. She says, "Why do you think apprenticeships are not part of the vocabulary in primary school?"
It's a brilliant question. It has amazed me. The problem was everything is focused on university, and it's how schools tend to be looked at, as if how many kids they get into university. I went to university as best time of life, so I'm absolutely not anti-university. But there is not enough is done to get teachers do not do enough, in my view, to encourage kids to do apprenticeships, and I think that is wrong. Absolutely wrong. And I would bring apprentices into school to talk to primary school children and secondary school children, and I would do it regularly as well, and just make sure that it can't just be a one-off career session you have a couple of times a year. It should be embedded in the curriculum. Careers, in my view, should be embedded in the curriculum all across the board. So when you do history, for example, you look at how you could become an archaeologist or museum curator, historical author or academic, and it doesn't matter whatever career you want to do, it should be embedded from an early age so people understand. And we've also got to get rid of stereotypes. So I've been to career shows at schools, and they have people dressed up, and surprise, surprise, the woman is a nurse and the engineer is a man with a hard hat on. And that's all got to be reversed. We don't have enough women doing STEM subjects, which I think is a real problem. In fact, we don't have enough people doing STEM subjects in general, but particularly women. So we've got to get rid of stereotypes. But you're absolutely right. It's got to be talked about more and embedded in the curriculum.
Thanks, Rob. And then I've got a question here from Bill. says, why should we pay full fees at university this coming year if a lot of the course is going to be delivered online? Ooh, that's a tricky one.
Well, I think that's a great question. And I asked one of the vice chancellors, I think it was, of Cambridge, though they're carrying on tuition classes, they've decided to put all their lectures online. Personally, I think that students should get a discount if they're not being able to go into the university, because one of my favourite university institutions is actually the Open University, and they enable people from all backgrounds. I think it was one of the great education reforms of the last century. And being sad, I used to occasionally watch these things on television pre-internet days. We had some kind of professor going on about some amazing thing late at night, and they charge they're very good value, and yet you're saying, but of course you don't go there for the most part. You may go for the odd bit here and there, but for the most part you do it online. So if universities are now going to say, well, we can't only teach online, then they shouldn't be charging the full 9,000 plus whack.
Okay, so it'd be really interesting to see how universities do react, wouldn't it, from here on? So what you're saying is you think there should be some kind of discount or adjustment to the fees whilst they're online?
If they're getting all their courses online, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Right, I've got a question now from Claudia, who is at the TES. For those who don't know, TES is an education newspaper, and she's basically saying, this is about the exam grades fiasco. She says, what's the Education Committee planning to do to address the recent exam grading fiasco? Is there going to be an inquiry? And if the inquiry finds serious failings, would you be calling for resignations?
Well, first of all, thank you to the TES, because they do some incredible coverage, and I really appreciate all the work of the journalists. And I look at it daily to find out what's going on in terms of education. And we in fact, next week we have Ofqual coming in to ask them why. You know, in fact, we were looking at the press release on it, and I said we don't need to give a quote. I think we just should put one word: why. And then a couple of weeks later, we've got Gavin Williamson, the Secretary of State, coming in. I want to find out what on earth went on, why Ofqual wouldn't publish the algorithm, what questions were asked by ministers, what questions were asked by Ofqual. Did Ofqual reassure the ministers that the system would be fair? How much does it all cost? I would like, possibly, I think it would be good if Ofqual were much more transparent. They spend a lot of money on communications officers. I think they've got 10 or something. I think they should deal with the press much more than they have done, and they should be communicating to schools much more than they have done. But this isn't just Ofqual; it's just so many figures in a pie that has got burnt in a big way.
It feels like the select committee are already looking into this in quite some.
Yeah, I'm not going to call for resignations. It's not my job, and it's not my kind of politics either.
Okay,
I just want to focus on the issues and help try and make things better.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, I've got another question. I'm going to change the topic a little bit, which is, and this is from Luca Kelly. How do you feel about the BBC bias and un-British approach to the last night of the proms? So for those who haven't seen, there's been a bit of palaver about whether, was it Land of Hope and Glory and Rule Britannia would be played.
I think this goes back to some of the questions you asked me earlier. I think the BBC decision is pretty appalling. I think that, you know, we should not be embarrassed of our history and heritage, warts and all. Yes, there are things that we got wrong as a country, but you can't hide those things away. I've just heard that the person who founded the British Museum, that's the statue, is going to be hidden away. So there's something in the newspapers about that. I mean, I would like it on the statue if it said this person was a slave owner. I would be very happy for that to take place. You have to acknowledge that they were different times, and sadly people felt in a different way, but also that they may have, as well as doing a lot of bad, they may have done a lot of good as well. And I think you need to reflect that. And I just think that the BBC is just, I think it's all about virtue signaling more than, and I just think it angers a lot of people because we should be proud of these songs that were great fun to sing, and what nation on the planet doesn't have a bit of there's a word for it, jingoism or whatever? I mean, for goodness sake, let's not take things so seriously. It's a bit of fun once a year, and I just think what the BBC. I understand it's just going to play the music now, not have someone sing it. Is that right? I think that's what
that's right. Yeah.
And I think that's just entirely wrong. And I'm not against the license fee, but I did bring a bill to Parliament to say that we should democratise the BBC. And what I mean by that is that we should be able to vote for the board, for the Director General, for the annual report and the direction of the strategy. Because if we're forced to pay this license fee, we have no say in how it's run. And I think if you democratised it, you'd probably have a very different. You probably wouldn't be banning last night at the Proms or whatever it may be.
Yeah, they might be a lot more responsive to what the general public are thinking, rather than the people in their inner circles that decide these things.
It's just virtue signalling to make some people in metropolitan London feel good. But we should be proud of our heritage and history, warts and all, and learn from the lessons of the past. There are very bad things that we did as a nation, but we should learn from the lessons of the past. But that doesn't mean you kind of wipe it from history, because we should be proud of the wonderful things as well that we've done as a nation.
Thanks, Rob. And then I've got a slightly different topic again. This is a question from Graham Locke, which is, do you believe in positive discrimination? I assume in terms of positive discrimination to help underrepresented groups into jobs and so on.
No, I don't. I'm often asked this question because I have a walking disability and from birth. But I would rather. I think we have to be a meritocracy. But what I do believe in is a level playing field and a ladder of opportunity and equality of opportunity. And what I want to do is to make sure we have equality of opportunity, so that everyone has a chance to climb that ladder. And too often people don't have equality of opportunity, and there is injustice because it's not fair for disadvantaged groups. So, but that's where I am on that.
And how do you think we could bring about that greater equality so people can get on that ladder of opportunity? What are the key things?
Well, that goes to the beginning of it, is education.
Right.
Everything, so many problems and difficulties, and you can achieve so many ambitions, aspirations if you get education right, education and skills right. That's why I'm very proud to be chair of the select committee, education select committee, and have an influence on policy and scrutinise the work of government, because to me it's the most important area of government.
Thank you, Rob. And then I think probably one final question before we then wrap it up. So this is from Caroline. She says, what plans are there to ensure that the next generation is exposed to more different points of view and to encourage them to discuss and critically assess the value of opposing arguments? I guess it's this thing about freedom of speech and ideas and engaging with stuff.
Yeah, I think this is a big issue, because it's a great question, because the problem with Twitter is that if certain people don't like your argument, they often try and close you down. Whether is it called cancel culture or mob rule or whatever you want to call it. And then people are frightened to put stuff up because they don't want the aggro, and because it can be pretty horrific being part of a so-called Twitter storm. I know that from when I've done things wrong or put stuff on, made mistakes in the past, and I know many people who suffered much worse than I do. And we talked about mental health for younger people earlier in social media. But I think we need to be bold and brave, and that's why the Common Sense Institute is so important, because we need to make sure that we have common sense and free speech, and there is honest, open debate. I admire a lot of Labour people because I know their whole mission is to care about the disadvantaged. And
who are your favourite Labour MPs or Labour people? Because you got a pro-union thing going, didn't you, with the Conservatives?
Yeah, no, I'm honorary president of a group called Union Blue, which is about promoting trade union in the Conservative Party, and also supporting those third of trade union members who vote Tory. I'm just honorary president of that, but I've been accused of being a powerlight in the past, not a evil powerlight, but a Lucy powerlight. I think I worked with her on the select committee, and I think she's an incredible MP. Stephen Timms is pretty thoughtful. I voted for him as chair of the welfare committee that work and pensions committee that he runs. And I think there are some good, thoughtful Labour MPs coming through. Not all of them are momentum. And I think that actually Keir Starmer is a force to be reckoned with, and that he's going to change the Labour Party. It won't be done with the kind of pizzazz of Tony Blair, but I think he will kind of change the Labour Party in a big way and turn it back into a sort of social democratic party.
Do you think the government are going to have to up their game as a result?
I hope so. I'd rather there be a stronger Labour Party to give us a kick up the backside. So that, because I think too many people think it's Corbyn time, but it isn't. I think I think the Labour Party are going to do a lot to change their party in the eyes of the electorate from how it was seen in terms of Corbyn and what went on, the anti-Semitism and all this kind of thing. And I think we need to treat the Labour Party really seriously, and I hope that it stops any complacency what they're doing.
Thank you. And listen, I'm just gonna wrap up now with one final question, which is sort of a personal one about yourself. So you've been in Parliament for 10 years. I don't think there's any doubt you've managed to achieve quite a lot in terms of the different campaigns you've run and the areas you've been involved with. If you're able to be in Parliament for the next 10 years, what do you think you'd like to be able to achieve in that time?
I would like to have a real guarantee to every young person that they can do an apprenticeship, but a real guarantee. So and that either it's, and not just that they do a level 2 or level 3, but they work all the way through, so they go right up to degree level. And I'd like to see something like 50% of students doing degree level apprenticeships, higher apprenticeships, because I think not only would that solve so many problems of social injustice and give that ladder of opportunity, but it will also build the skills that we need for our nation. So I go on about it all the time, as you know, I think with the right policies, with the right support for universities, and targeting money to do those things, I think it would be possible.
Brilliant. So you've got 10 years, so we'll catch up. Hopefully before 10 years are up, but if we catch up again in 10 years' time, it'd be really interesting to see how you've got on with that.
I look forward to it.
Listen, Rob, thank you so much for your time today. For the people that have been listening in, thank you so much for A, coming along, B, submitting the questions. We weren't able to get through every question. I can see some have been emailed in, some have come through the chat function. We will try and get this recording up online later on today. In order, if you want to come back and watch it again, it will be there. If you've got any suggestions or feedback as to how today's gone, how we could tweak future events, we'd really, really appreciate that. We're on a learning curve here, and we don't think we've got everything right by any means. But I'd just like to finish by thanking again Rob for helping us out today and coming and talking so openly and honestly, and for engaging in a conversation. Have a lovely day, everybody, and hopefully see you again here soon for our next event. Thank you very much.